Hello to my friends in the class of 1971. I'm Ken Owen, class of 1982 at DePauw, and it's really a pleasure to bring you this presentation today. Just to give you some history, I worked in TV news for about 2 decades and then came back to DePauw and worked there for about 2 decades. And in my spare time at DePauw, one of the things I tried to do was create and save as much history as I could. You might have seen the Monon Memories. I put together a clip for every game from 1890 through the last one. Tried to save films and other artifacts that were hanging around that hadn't been processed yet. And about 5-6 years ago, one of the classes, I can't remember which one, first asked me to do this. And I, make a presentation. And I went to the library and literally went through 4 years of the DePauw, page by page by page. And here's me doing that for you guys just a few weeks ago. The idea is to try to find the highlights of your 4 years and piece together kind of a little package so you can go down memory lane with me. I wasn't there. I was 10 or 11 at the time, but I was there in spirit. And this is probably the last time I'm doing this. So it's a lot of fun to put together, and it's a lot of fun to see your reactions when it's over. I find things like old class bulletins, yearbooks, photos. This year it was trickier because of COVID. I couldn't get into the archives, and so some of it was limited a bit, but I did find some really good stuff, and we have a lot of ground to cover, so away we go. Your final weeks before college began were memorable and historic. It was the summer of love in '67. The Beatles had just released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in May. It was all over the radio, and it was also the summer of violent protests in 150 cities. On August 3rd of that year, President William Kerstetter announced DePauw had received a $75,000 grant from the Kresge Foundation to fund a new School of Music building. It'd be a 3-building performing arts center that would cost a total of $5 million. Groundbreaking expected within 3 years, they said. You were probably packing to come to DePauw when the Vice President of the United States, Hubert Humphrey, spoke at Goben Church for Business and Industry Day. September 3rd, 1967 is a date that, if you're like me, has left snapshots in your mind. It was the day the class of '71 arrived on campus. There were 715 of you. Total enrollment was 2,439. They called that an all-time high, up 17% from the year before. Men outnumbered women. That's changed these days. All but about 650 of the student body came from Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Missouri. There were 28 international students at DePauw, 5 from the Philippines, 4 from Iran, 3 from Japan. 1967 marked the 100th anniversary of the first women students being enrolled at DePauw. Your opening convocation took place at 4 the afternoon of the 3rd, with orientation beginning immediately. The registration process was described as bewildering, with new students having to complete as many as 11 IBM computer cards. And here are the big dollars DePauw was seeking back then. You paid $1,750 tuition, plus $950 room and board as freshmen. By the year you graduated, it was $2,100 for tuition and fees, and $1,200 for those posh rooms and sensational food. Just to compare, the average new car cost $3,215 in 1967. A gallon of gas was 32 cents. The median household income was $7,200. That $2,700 it cost to attend DePauw in 1967, when you put it through the inflation calculator, is $56,938.20 in today's dollars. For 2021-22, all in, a year at DePauw is $67,994. So you got a bargain. September 8th was your first day of classes, and that day's issue of the DePauw announced that Ted Catula had been named Director of Student Union Activities and Assistant Dean of Students. It was also reported that the spring grade point average at DePauw had hit a new high, and as Harry Belafonte sang, yes, the women are smarter. There were 25 new faculty members that fall. They included Keith Opdahl, Tom Emery, Saad Ibrahim, and Bob Calvert. And President Bill Kerstetter's Design for a Decade campaign was going full tilt.
DePauw's answer is to construct a new science center, which will accommodate chemistry, physics, mathematics, geology, and geography.
To achieve these purposes, DePauw University is seeking to raise $33 million.
That fall, ROTC enrollment hit a record low at DePauw as the Vietnam War continued. October 10th brought word that Dean Robert Farber had overruled the student court and suspended for the semester 2 students who had been charged with underage possession of alcohol. They could reapply for admission. There were also questions being raised about women's hours. It seems so quaint now. Co-eds had to be back in their rooms by a specific hour, and chaperones were required when men and women visited each other's living unit. Were you part of the in-crowd Old Gold weekend? Ramsey Lewis performed. October 17th, the DePauw reports the death of sophomore Arian O'Connell. She was killed in an auto accident 2 miles south of Greencastle. On October 21st, about 50 DePauw students traveled to the nation's capital for a huge anti-war protest. 100,000 marched to the Pentagon calling for peace. And this photo from October 1967, "This is the draft hanging over your head," reads the sign. The busy month ends with the college announcing it would build a $7 million science building set for completion in late 1970. Then it's November, and the Student Senate votes in favor of a resolution supporting black power as a legitimate means to gain the emancipation of the black man from what the white man thinks is best for him. There were ongoing discussions over whether Greek chapters should be permitted to accept students from historically black Clark Atlanta University as part of an exchange program. Some students complained about the newness of the thing. Quote, "Some of us have never come into contact with another race." The chair of the Board of Trustees, legendary Wall Street Journal editor Barney Kilgore, dies of cancer. And a reminder, it's November. After the close shave of the year before, and as Frank Sinatra's Tony Rome opened in theaters across America, the Monon Bell had been missing for almost a year. As the 1967 game day approached, a UPI story traced the theft to 7 DePauw students. Remember, DePauw had the bell. They said if certain tools were brought on game day, the bell could be recovered. DePauw came into the big game at 6-1-1. A win would give the Tigers their best season since 1951, and this early run looked promising for the home squad. Wabash, on the other hand, was 1-7 and a 3-touchdown underdog, according to the Indianapolis Star. But turnovers can change everything in a bell game, and DePauw coughed the ball up 7 times on this afternoon. The scoreboard still showed goose eggs in the third quarter, but this DePauw fumble turned out to be a game changer. Wabash recovered, and a few plays later, Mike Henry takes it in from 2 yards out. And look here, the visitors' bench goes wild. There was some other action that didn't amount to points. The teams got into it shortly after the scoring play. And it was around this same time that the bell, which had been buried in the north end of Blackstock Stadium, was unearthed. As the game neared its conclusion, you could barely tell the home team from the visitors. Mud made Wabash's jerseys interchangeable with their rivals, and this DePauw player definitely needed the Maytag man. With time running out, a desperate Tiger heave. It led to the day's 4th interception in a game where DePauw completed only 6 passes. And as time expired, things got out of hand once again. The mud-covered Little Giants left Blackstock Stadium victorious, and a Wabash truck collected the now recovered Monon Bell, parading it past the visitors' stands for all to see. Soon another winter would arrive, along with questions about what will the Bell game be like next year. December 12th, the student paper announces Jack McWethy would be the editor next semester. That name rings a bell, doesn't it? Here's a shot from the Gold Diggers Ball. The calendar turns to 1968. January 23rd, Harold Macmillan, the former British Prime Minister who gave the 1958 commencement speech, returns for another address. Also in January, new rules allowed upper-class women to keep late hours up to 2:30 a.m. 8 times per semester. And there was word 2 Clark Exchange students would indeed be coming, one to Alpha Chi, the other to Delta Gamma. February brought news the 4 Tops would play Bowman Gym in March. with the cryin' shames $5 for both. Margaret Mead, who once attended DePauw, spoke in Meharry Hall on gender and intellect. Another alum, Dr. Percy Julian, addressed the challenges and dangers in this era of incessant change. Here he is looking at a model of the proposed science building with faculty. The Student Senate approved a new Association of Afro-American Students. This is a shot from 1969, and proposed a humanitarian project for refugee work in South Vietnam. Meanwhile, the University Council discussed the issue of violent obstruction with the goal of ensuring that protests remain peaceful. But the administration had its own ideas. There was a big fire at the Banner Graphic downtown on March 6th, which student volunteers helped extinguish. And there was a debate in Meharry Hall on the Vietnam War and a feeling the administration was focused on less important matters. April 4th, 1968 was a sad day for our nation and your class. 3 days after his assassination, a local march was held to remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There was a series of meetings that month on a thorny issue, whether men and women should be allowed to study together behind closed doors. Another issue, whether the mandate that students live in university-approved dwellings amounted to discrimination in housing. April 24th, this sounds familiar, 200 students protested at Mason Hall, calling for student power, saying the administration wouldn't listen to them. 3 days later, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles performed for you guys. Smoke damage was left by an arson fire in Longden Hall. As your freshman year wound up in May, it destroyed a couch. And summer brought yet another tragedy, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. On to your sophomore year. There were lots of thorny discussions going on. Greencastle considered City Ordinance 1968-6, an ordinance defining certain acts as misdemeanors and providing penalties therefor. It covered topics such as visitation in bedrooms of the opposite sex, pornographic comic and art books, dives, and burning waste, and you guys fought it. That fall, 5 DePauw students were denied the right to vote. Male enrollment declined for the 3rd consecutive year. In October, Hogate Hall, a new dormitory for women with suites, was dedicated. Old Gold Weekend featured a symposium on law, liberty, and progress, featuring UN President Charles Malik, McGeorge Bundy, and Gary Mayor Richard Hatcher. Charles Evers, Mississippi Field Secretary for the NAACP, and the brother of Medgar Evers, spoke at DePauw. He attacked white apathy and said, "We've had nothing but separation all of our lives. What are we going to do with it? This is our country, black and white." Kurt Vonnegut also came to campus that fall. And on November 1st, François Mitterrand, head of the socialist left in France and a candidate for president in 1965, gave a convocation. To November 16th, the bell tolls yet again. The fall of 1968 was busy at DePauw with the opening of a new women's dorm, Hogate Hall, an Old Gold concert by Stan Getz, and it was a presidential election year. At a time when the local bar had a soft drink sign and call waiting was still several years away, Bowman Jim received an important delivery from the postman. A message for Tom Mont and his coaching staff, postmarked November 5th, read, "Don't worry about Indiana State, that game doesn't count. Get ready for Wabash. They beat you 7-0 last year because you wasted time preparing for Indiana State." It added ominously, "Don't forget your job depends on beating Wabash." It was signed a very influential alumnus with money. And there were other pressures. California's Fresno Bee, which had a listing of game day predictions, had DePauw, which was 5-3, winning 32-13. 11 days later, with the all-time series tied, was the day of decision, and the guy they called the Pot was ready to take charge. Late in the first quarter, DePauw sophomore quarterback Roy Pottinger connected with Scott Ralston on a 19-yard pass. It set up a quarterback sneak a few plays later that gave the Tigers a 6-0 lead. With 11:33 left in quarter number 2, Wabash signal caller Dave Knott found Steve Mihalko in the corner of the end zone, making it 7-6 home team. DePauw's John Sacramento made this 20-yard field goal before halftime, and the teams went to the locker room with the guys in black and gold leading 9-7. It became a 5-point lead after Sacramento made a 34-yarder late in the third. The Little Giants were about to get the ball back late in the game when they were called for roughing the punter here. DePauw kept possession and made hay, sealing the contest when fullback Bill Holton plowed in from 1 yard out with 1:37 left to go. DePauw ran a record 88 offensive plays and held the ball for almost 41 minutes. Yes, influential alumnus, like the Postal Service, they delivered. Yay, Tigers! Still in November, the ongoing controversy over visitation policies and rules on automobiles leads the University Council to approve amending DePauw's charter and bylaws. But that move died when President Kerstetter refused to put the measure before the Board of Trustees. Within a month, Student Senate Vice President Don Coffin had resigned, calling the body a farce, saying there's no reason to have a student government if it has no authority. In December 1968, Dean Robert Farber told the University Council, "We need to do more to make DePauw accessible to underprivileged students." There were 24 students of color on campus at the time. January 1969, a faculty committee changes it to 31 courses required for graduation, down from 33. On January 31st at Gobin Church, President Kerstetter decided to give a speech instead of answer questions about black admissions, and the students walked out in protest. February 7th, The Temptations played for you. Again, $5 for a ticket. The women of Hogate Hall withdrew from the Association of Women Students and announced they would adopt their own social rules, which would include open visitation and no women's hours. A few days later, the university stated it would enforce social regulations until a review of policies was completed. Students who break the regulations would lose their scholarships. And a few days after that, there was an overflow crowd in Meharry Hall as the Student Association approved a social autonomy proposal, which was rejected immediately by the administration. It was a wild and woolly time. On March 4th, the Indiana House passed a bill to restrict student voting. Deja vu 50 years later? On March 14th, about 40 DePauw students confronted a Marine recruiter in the Union Building. April saw the Board of Trustees appointing a committee of students and administrators to formulate social and other non-academic regulations. The April 18th student newspaper carried this message. And when asked by an alumnus whether there could be student turmoil at DePauw, President Kerstetter replied, "Until 3 weeks ago, Harvard thought it was indestructible." The collegians cut a record that spring. On April 22nd of 1969, winter term was approved. With the semester ending on May 3rd, the Byrds performed. It was an eventful summer. July 20th of 1969, American astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans ever to land on the moon. And August brought Woodstock. And now you're 3 miles high, to paraphrase the Byrds, junior year. In September, the president reports 48 students are studying abroad, and 125 will do so second semester. He predicts soon 60% of DePauw students will have an overseas experience. An African Studies Center opens at DePauw, and a newfangled thing called cable TV comes to campus. On September 30th, astronaut and alum Joe Allen spoke in the UB Ballroom. October 6th brought Up With People to Bowman Gym. Also in October, a committee of students asked the campus to suspend operations on October 15th to call awareness to the Vietnam War. President Kerstetter responded that classes would not be suspended, but that students would be encouraged to discuss the war in their classrooms. It was part of a nationwide program of teach-ins and classroom debates, which was called the largest nationwide peaceful protest in U.S. history. November 14th, 1969, brought Shirley Chisholm to campus with the topic, "I Will Die a Rebel." On November 15th, Motown legends The Four Tops were on campus, but before that concert, some serious business. In July of 1969, man landed on the moon for the first time. 2 months later, Abbey Road, the last album the Beatles recorded together, was released. And college football celebrated its 100th year in 1969, a fact that was celebrated on postage stamps and a billboard alongside 231 in Greencastle, the road that connects the two colleges. Game day programs even had a message from the president. The Indianapolis Star saw Wabash as the favorite that fall. It noted that Mike Henry was running wild, gaining 1,235 yards as the state's leading rusher. The paper pointed out that DePauw had beaten St. Joseph's, a team Wabash lost to, but the Little Giants had beaten Ohio Wesleyan, Wheaton, and Butler, teams that all trounced DePauw. Here's a pregame shot of Blackstock Stadium. Conditions would have been better for a cross-country ski outing. You'll notice as the camera pans that the scoreboard is on, yet there's no activity in the parking lot. It was later described as a shivering crowd of 2,000. The Little Giant struck first, Henry with a 1-yard plunge. With 6:30 left in the first quarter, he had 144 yards on the day on 43 carries. The home team got on the scoreboard when DePauw's Jim Posiak hit a 28-yard field goal with 11:43 left to go in the first half. It was now 7-3. In the third quarter, a big play for the home team. DePauw senior quarterback Ron McBride connects with Scott Ralston on a 39-yard strike, setting up a 2-yard touchdown run 6 plays later by sophomore Doug Maple. DePauw was up 10-7. In the fourth quarter, with Wabash threatening, Mark Dinwiddie intercepts a Little Giant pass at the goal line. And with 91 seconds left in the game, McBride, playing in his last college contest, scampered 13 yards right up the middle for the TD that iced it. It was 2 straight bell wins for DePauw, and the quarterback was named the game's MVP.
2-1, looking good, gang. Women ask the administration for no limits on hours for upper-class co-eds and extended visitation hours for first-year women. In December, look who was named editor of the student paper. Why, that's Wendy Gifford. In January 1970, the Dean of Students announces that violating the university's automobile regulations will no longer lead to social probation. A big change in February, women begin receiving keys to their living units and can now come and go as they please. Progress. The February 17th issue of the paper announced the university would be phasing out graduate studies programs in the social sciences, humanities, and language arts. In March, black students living in Bishop Roberts declare the Men's Hall Association is not a legal body and that they will no longer follow the social regulations imposed by it. A month later, the Men's Hall Association declares itself completely autonomous from the university. On April 30th, we learned the U.S. had invaded Cambodia. And the next day, the association performed for Little 500 in Bowman Gym. Their big hit was Everyone Knows It's Windy. But a defining moment of your 4 years happened in the early morning of that day, May 1st, a fire at the Air Force ROTC building. The FBI was brought in to investigate sabotage and destruction of government property. 2 students were treated for burns. There was $10,000 in damage. The fire alarm went off at 4:38 in the morning, and the fire was out by 5. 5 rooms were damaged. An empty gas can and an aerosol can with combustible contents were found near the building. 3 days later, 4 students were shot at Kent State. And then there was another fire at the ROTC building. And mass campus meetings were held May 5th and 6th. Let's take a deep breath and begin the home stretch. Senior year. The September 5th newspaper reports the Science Center is behind schedule, and it won't be ready for the fall of 1971, not that you cared. On September 11th, Ralph Nader spoke at Gobin Church on environmental hazards, man-made and man-remedied. He also held a news conference in the Union Building, and this amazing 16-millimeter footage remains. Here's a clip.
Business is not so much opposed to Marxism or communism as they are to good old free enterprise, competitive business, and consumer sovereignty. That's what really gets them all worried. One can imagine what would happen if people could see what goes into their processed food products, or they could see what frauds so many of the so-called cleaners and cleaning agents are, and the kind of harm that's involved. Or they could see the enormous price fixing that goes on in the petroleum industry and in other industries that sell products to them. And the deliberate obfuscation or complexity of such services as insurance policies, so that the consumer couldn't possibly compare one policy with another to see which is the best buy.
Still in September, this is ominous news. Old Topper Tavern to increase ID checks. Again, news you shrugged off, class of 71. And then from the September 18th newspaper, the Putnam County Sheriff proclaimed pot is all over DePauw. He called the administration gutless because they won't get rid of the hippies. Robert Albright, and this is him, his picture is in the archives, added, "Long hair signifies to me belligerence and hatred of this country, and I'm going to fight it." October 1st, 1970, the Exiles perform an Old Gold Day concert in Bowman. The group later took the S off and became Exile and had a #1 hit in 1978 with Kiss You All Over. Remember that one? Later in October, a co-ed with a pledge paddle defended herself and her Alpha Phi sisters against a would-be prowler who had broken into a second-story window at the sorority. The culprit eventually got a year in prison. On October 31st, George Manhart, Professor Emeritus of History and the author of DePauw Through the Years, which is a terrific resource, died at the age of 80. And the next day, November 1st, retired art professor Reed Winsey died of a heart attack. Yes, it is November, and Wabash made 2 attempts to steal the Monon Bell that month. On November 6th, Richie Havens of Woodstock fame performed for Monon Bell weekend. The next night, Chase performed, and in between... In 1970, a pass by DePauw's Jim Abram is pulled down by an acrobatic Steve Rails just short of the goal line. A sneak on the very next play gives DePauw a 7-0 lead. Later, a sideline pass by Abram turns into an enormous gainer. Rails finds himself all alone. He scampers 96 yards for another DePauw touchdown, and the visiting Tigers lead 14-0. But Wabash comes fighting back in the second half. After a lengthy scramble, Don Van Doorzen connects with Dave Garbison on a 12-yard scoring play. With 6.5 minutes left in the game, Van Doorzen hits Larry Ladd with a 4-yard touchdown pass. And the gutsy Little Giants go for the 2-point conversion and the lead. But the quarterback is sacked by DePauw's Kirk Martin, and DePauw wins by 1. 3-1. Way to go, class of 71. The November 20th DePauw reported that the Community Conduct Council had defeated a motion that would have allowed for social autonomy when it comes to visitation. On and on that goes. Sad news from that day. Senior Roberta Polly Hansen was killed in an auto accident while driving back to DePauw from her hometown of Princeton, Indiana. From the December 8th paper, the 2:30 a.m. curfew for women will be enforced, says the university. And now we flip ahead to 1971. January of your senior year brought the first DePauw winter term with it. Our Buckminster Fuller spent the month on campus, and a geodesic dome was constructed on East College lawn. Composer Aaron Copland was here, too. About 20% of students spent that January off campus for all or part of winter term. In late January, 2 suspects in the ROTC fire, now former students, pleaded guilty and received suspended sentences. February 12th, senior Jim Posiak, a punter and place kicker for DePauw, signs with the Denver Broncos. There he is sealing the deal. 7 days later, February 19th, the Carpenters perform at Bowman Gym for winter weekend. They'd already had big hits with Close to You and We've Only Just Begun, and For All We Know had hit the top 40 just 6 days before. In March, the Indiana House of Representatives takes away the right of students to vote in their college community. On April 7th, Pauline Frederick, NBC News United Nations correspondent, spoke in Goban Church. And that month, the men of Phi Delta Theta and Sigma Nu set out to create a new world record for the longest basketball game. They played 101 hours straight. Phi Delta won 12,518 to 11,544. A better number, it raised $1,600 for the local mental health association. On April 24th, 2,300 gathered in Bowman Gym to see the American Rock Opera Company perform Jesus Christ Superstar. Little 500 weekend brought Jerry Jeff Walker, Albert King, and Ian and Sylvia to campus. The board launched a $52 million fundraising campaign extending the Design for a Decade effort. In late April, your class voted 144 to 93 to not wear caps and gowns and instead donate the nearly $4 per person rental fee to mental health initiatives. But university policy again prevailed. May 20th, 1971, a fire at the Lambda Chi House almost completely gutted it, according to the May 21st paper, with damage estimated at more than $300,000, a lot of money back then. 28 people were inside at the time. Thankfully, no injuries were reported. 2 days later, May 22nd, the day before your graduation, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun spoke at a special convocation at Gobin Church. His daughter, Susan Blackmun Carl, and her husband, Roger, are classmates of yours. Here, preserved on very early and primitive videotape, is a clip from that address.
To those among you who are members of the class of 1971, and to Dr. and Mrs. Kerstetter, and all of the others who have made last evening and this day a memorable one for Mrs. Blackmun and me, we give you our hearty thanks. You do us honor in asking us to share with you and part of your commencement festivities. And we are happy to be in Indiana, here amidst the memories of Washington Charles DePauw and the others who have made this great university what it is. Shaw put these words in the mouth of one of his characters in Pygmalion. Independence, that's middle-class blasphemy. We are all dependent on one another, every soul of us on earth. Finally, the reference to words that the Chief Justice offered earlier this week before the American Law Institute in a talk he called the necessity for civility. How much we need that today in every walk of life, on the campus, in the courtroom, in our daily demeanor. That we forsake the mob. It was no one other than Mr. Lincoln who said that there is no grievance that is a fit object of redress by mob law. Well, while it's well to examine these old and established so-called principles, and I'm all in favor of it because I'm doing it every day, I think we should concede that those principles have been evolved in the light of experience of generations just as good as we are. As we change, which we must, I hope we can leave some of the trees standing. And this, I suspect, is what this university and its faculty and the student body of years past have exemplified and stood for. Examination of basics, picking and choosing those that are sound, and going on to establish others. These days are not easy, but I doubt if any of us would really want to miss them.
Now that is some pretty cool history. The following day, May 23rd, 1971, Commencement Day. Moved inside to Bowman Gym because of the weather. 556 got degrees on that day. That number includes graduate students. And the speaker was the wonderful Lee Hamilton, a 1952 DePauw graduate, longtime congressman, and I'll add, national treasure.
This nation needs people who see that too many for too long have been in a headlong rush toward progress and power measured in terms of dollars, miles of concrete, miles per hour, kilowatts, and nuclear missiles. This nation needs people who recognize that this nation is rich enough to provide for all Americans health care, education, and the basic necessities of life if we have the will to redirect our resources to the goal of improving the quality of life. From this memorable afternoon, you traveled diverse paths to graduate schools, marriage, military service, and if I read the employment statistics correctly for liberal arts graduates, a few fortunate among you may even find jobs. But none of you will be left untouched by the crises that surround us. You have been equipped, as few have in this day, to deal with them constructively. Not all of you will. But the hope is that enough of you will to move this nation in your generation a step or two closer to a more perfect union. We wish you Godspeed.
Congressman Hamilton alluded to the tough job market you entered. This was the cover of Time magazine published the day after commencement. Okay, some fun and final facts as we wrap up. You again came in as a class of 715. 556 graduated. That includes graduate students, and that proves that Boffman, Yaus, and those other legendary professors were pretty tough on you. There were 2,371 students here in the spring of 1971. We had 1,705 this spring. There were 190 faculty members in 1971. That's at 228 today. DePauw had 86 acres 50 years ago. That's at 695 today, due in large part to the addition of the DePauw Nature Park's 520 acres back in 2004. The university's endowment has grown from $16 million to $638 million. Those buildings Bill Kerstetter talked about in Design for a Decade, the Julian Science and Math Center, originally opened in 1972, was renovated and doubled in size in 2003 when it was rededicated. The Performing Arts Center opened in 1976. It was expanded and renovated about 15 years ago and is now known as the Green Center for the Performing Arts. And Bowman Gym, I really miss that building, came down right after my graduation in 1982. A few months before, the then state-of-the-art Lilly Center had opened. In the last few years, that building, too, has been renovated and expanded to meet the needs of modern students, faculty, and staff. And East College, which they talked about taking down in the 1970s, egad, it was saved, thankfully, and still stands tall. Hogate Hall, dedicated your sophomore year, was demolished in May 2020, and a new residence hall adjacent to that spot opened in the fall and is now named in honor of 1957 graduate and civil rights legend Vernon Jordan. The Ubben Lecture Series was launched in 1986 with a speech by Colorado Governor Richard Lamb on the need for health care reform. Since that time, people like Margaret Thatcher, Mikhail Gorbachev, Bill Clinton, David Cameron, and Malala have come to DePauw, and all expenses have been covered by the Ubben's gift. This place is what it is largely because of what we as alumni give back, and thanks to all of you for what you do for DePauw. We have much to cheer about as we celebrate the past and who we are today. Here's to you, class of 1971.
And there you have it, friends, 4 years and a little package. I would be remiss if I didn't say to you that I wish we were all together today. I feel very badly that both your class and the class of 1970 got dealt this cruel blow by COVID, which is so full of cruel blows, and are having to have a virtual reunion. But I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I want to commend you. I realize that you had little sway in world events, but that was quite a 4-year period you experienced there, and with Watergate right on the back end, looking back, you realize how much history was made and really what an important and shaping time that was in American history. I send my very best from Avon, Indiana. Do enjoy yourselves. And one quick note, when the university does get back to being open in a full way, I encourage you to get to the archives. There are so many artifacts, many of which I shared with you today, but you can dig and dig and dig and revisit and relearn. And I will say that of all the snapshots in my mind that I have, and I mentioned one of them during the program, but I can still remember that day in August of 1978 when my parents dropped me off at the Union Building, and after we got settled in, I watched them drive away in a Buick convertible. I watched that car until it was out of sight, And I had all these new friends back in the building and had a real quick cry. You know, for the first time in my life, I was alone. I was in college. I had to be a grown-up, and my parents and I were separated. I know you had that moment too. DePauw has so many indelible memories in my mind, and I hope over the next hours and days you can share them and continue sharing them. The magic of this online thing, even though we're all tired of Zoom, is that we can communicate. We can send photos and videos and keep in touch in ways that were unimaginable 15 years ago. So again, Ken Owen, wishing you the very best, and I'm going to leave you today with a very fitting ending to this program, the DePauw National Anthem. Take care, my friends, and enjoy your reunion.